Theatre Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
I don't know what time would you worry awful about Billy when he's late in returning, do you know?
Already once you said that sentence.
I'm not allowed to repeat my sentences so when I'm worried.
You are allowed.
Billy may have fell down the hole with them feet of his.
Billy had sense enough not to fall down holes.
From New York City, this is Theatre Talk. I'm Michael Riedel, the theatre columnist of the New York Post.
And I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins. One of the wonderful successes of the new theatre season is a revival of Martin McDonagh's Cripple of Inishmaan. It was directed by Garry Hynes, who's here with us today, and it stars Marie Mullen. Garry and Marie founded the Druid Theatre Company together, and together came to New York and won Tony Awards for The Beauty Queen of Leenane. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Garry,
very nice to be here.
Yes, yeah, we haven't seen you guys in a while. I remember we interviewed you, Garry, right after you won the Tony Award for Beauty Queen of Leenane.
Did you? I can't remember very much about that. I was just everything was a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
I really didn't expect to win, and so then when I did, I was really stunned. So most of the evening I actually spent stunned. It was only the following morning that I thought to myself, my God, I've won a Tony.
It was a wonderful production.
Time.
And we have to say, you were the first woman to win Direction Tony Award.
I was, but it's a bit like they talk about Irish buses, you know what I mean? You wait for one and then two come along at the same time.
Well, yeah, that's right, you and Julie Taymor.
Yeah, Julie Taymor won one, I think something like about 10 minutes after me.
That's right, she won for the Lion King.
But that's quite
she won for
something
the Lion King, yeah.
that there was that distinction. How many years ago was that? 11, right?
10 or 11, something like that.
Yeah, and now it's gotten much better for women in the theatre.
Absolutely, but I remember at the time, you know, when we were nominated and people began to talk about the fact to say that no woman had ever won for direction of a play, or direction at all, and I thought that couldn't be. I mean, the Tony Awards are, what, more than 50 years old, and, you know, women have made such great contribution in terms of lighting, design, direction, and so on, but of course...
Acting too?
Well, obviously for acting, but, you know, there have been plenty of Tonys for acting.
Sure.
Yes, because it's a gender-based category.
Yeah, I think the thing is that you make the mistake, of course, of thinking the Tony Awards are awards for American theatre generally. They're not. They're for shows that happen on Broadway, which is not quite the same.
You and Marie, you and Garry started the Druid Theatre Company together in Ireland. What was it a struggle for women at that point?
Well, I think it was. It was unusual. I mean, we met in college and we all knew about Garry's energy and Garry's interest and love of the theatre even then when we were still students. So I think that was unusual at the time.
Where was the college?
The university in Galway, University College Galway, and we had often we did a production there. We had often talked about the possibility of making a career out of the business at that time, but nothing very. We had exams and we were going to see what sort of further studies we'd do, and it was nothing very serious. And then the summer came, and we decided we'd make an attempt to set up a summer season with 3 plays, and it went from there.
And off you
this was
went.
1975, right? So it's been
1975. Yeah, I mean, we didn't have any idea. I mean, it took me a few years to realise, 5 or 6 years actually directing professionally, so to speak, before I realised it was actually unusual to have women directors. And it's the same thing. We wanted to sort of go on, you know, making theatre, but the notion of trying to become a professional seemed incredibly remote to us. So we thought, well, why not found our own company? And at the age of 2021, you can do that, you know.
Not afraid of anything.
Not afraid of anything. You know, everybody says, well, you were very brave. Not at all. It was bravery didn't come into it at all. It was great fun.
Yes. Well, I mean, that is the lesson, though, I think, to be in the theatre. If you meet a lot of young people, they say, how do I get started? How do I get in? How do I get there? And I suppose the best advice, though, is to say, you know, just do a play.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it is. And I think the thing is, I had worked here as a student while I was in college. I worked here in New York as a student, and I saw all the great stuff off Broadway. And it was that experience, rather than any experience of Irish theatre, that taught me to think, oh, look, you can make theatre in small rooms. You don't need big stages or anything like that. And that was very much part of the driving thinking behind founding Druid.
And you were also inspired by writers at that time as well, by the theatre and how people were approaching the theatre in America, because
absolutely,
she used to come home and, you know, some of us didn't go to America for summers. and she would bring all these wonderful plays back. And
who were the playwrights then?
David Rabe, Paul
John
Foster.
Ware.
Paul Foster,
John
how
Ware,
wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
Paul
Well,
Foster,
just
John Ware.
very sad to see Tom O'Horgan pass.
Yes, that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So all that was.
So that's interesting now, because we've had a great, we've benefited in New York from this wonderful wave of Irish writing in the last few years. Martin McDonagh, certainly, the wonderful Conor McPherson, who writes beautiful plays. So it's sort of interesting. What you're saying at the time you founded the Druid was, what was the state of Irish writing then? Did you not have a lot of young writers, or were you, were sort of wedded to the classics?
Well, you had master writers. You had Friel was there,
right.
and you had Tom Murphy. But these were established writers in the professional theatre, to which to people like myself and Marie at university in the west coast of Ireland, with no professional theatre whatsoever in our background, that was just very, very remote. Even the idea of sort of, we did one of Brian Friel's plays, but he, so it was, the early years of Druid were, in fact, Druid was kind of driven by the ideas of the theatre that I saw in New York, and indeed the repertoire in the early years was that. It was only gradually, over a period of 2-3 years, that we began, in fact, to develop new Irish writing and doing Irish writing. And really it was when Tom Murphy, in fact, became writer in association with the company in the early 80s that we began to actually concentrate on Irish work.
Now, why did Martin McDonagh come into your lives?
He came in, and I had been artistic director of the Abbey for 3 years, and had never intended to return to Druid, but was asked back, and did in 1995, I think. And I simply asked to see what plays had been coming across.
And these were unsolicited manuscripts,
These were unsolicited
right? I mean, no one knew
manuscripts.
who Martin was then.
I had no idea. And I remember reading one and coming downstairs and saying, who is this guy? Nobody knew, except that he had an address in London. And I said, has he sent anything else in? And he had, and I read that as well. Immediately arranged to meet him. Found that he'd been turned down by a number of other companies. Met him in London and optioned all 3 of the plays, which my board sort of, this was just a few months after I went back, and my board thought, perhaps, I wonder, have we made a mistake here?
What was the first one that you read of his? Was it Beauty Queen that you did so wonderfully on Broadway?
Yes, it was.
And what was it like to find a play that is now, I think, considered, a classic in the latter half of the 20th century, for the first time as an actress? Do you know you have something that you've not experienced before?
When I read it, I knew. I knew it was something really great. I didn't know how it was going to emerge and if we were going to be able to do it, the whole practicality of it. But I knew, just reading it, I knew it.
Did you know the part was yours when you read it?
Did I?
I'd say
think
you did,
so. I think I probably did.
You don't have to audition for your own friend, I hope.
No.
Well, it depends on suitability.
Yeah.
Sure,
I'm
of
not
course,
suitable for everything.
Yeah.
And but I think we did. Gary
Well,
gave it to me and
we-
said,
yeah.
read this, and didn't say anything else. He usually says that, and then I'm saying, oh my God, this is great. And I don't think there was a word changed in the whole script.
No, I think it was more a matter of how do you do it. I've
Yeah.
I've often said that if Martin actually brought Beauty Queen to a writer's workshop in Ireland at that time in the mid-90s, they would take one look at it. And I think this, in fact, was the reaction of some Irish theatres, would have said, look, we don't write plays set in Irish kitchens with pictures of the crucifix or anything anymore.
Would they feel that was demeaning?
Yes.
They would.
I mean,
And
there's
we
an argument in
moved
Ireland
past
that basically, and particularly when they look at the background, they will use an argument about Martin is that it's not really Irish, it's pastiche, and Martin's well used to these kind of arguments. It's kind of like saying that somehow or other, if you're Irish, you have to be reverential towards everything Irish, which is an incredibly old-fashioned idea. I mean, that dates back to the time when Synge was excoriated for the fact that he chose to present Irishmen who weren't perfect in every respect. It's very, very old-fashioned.
And we should say, to bring in the Cripple of Inishmaan, which is so wonderful McDonagh play now, having had some Irish ancestry myself, I view that play with such, it's so riveting because it really gives you a deep psychological truth about those people and the origin of a culture.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing, it deals with the whole issue of the loneliness, both the kind of need for a society and yet the terrible sort of
Isolation. Yeah.
Well, you're both isolated in it and you're too close to everybody.
Right.
And it's
good,
trying to
yeah.
mediate that kind of...
And for those who haven't seen the play, it's about this young man who is crippled.
He's crippled,
of
yeah.
Inishmaan, who's raised by his aunts.
Yes.
Ants, yes.
Yeah.
And he gets a chance to do a screen test.
Martin takes a real incident, which was there was a Man of Iron, is a famous documentary of the early part of the century,
Right.
which was made on Inishmore, the neighbouring of island to Inishmaan. And Martin takes that incident and then creates this extraordinary story of this young crippled boy deciding that it was his one way out of the island,
Right.
and that he gets a screen test and gets brought to Hollywood. I mean, it's an extraordinary story.
Yeah.
And just the idea of the story itself is extraordinary, but then the skill with which Martin delivers that story up, it's wonderful.
But you see, though, in the sense of the isolation, the desire that the boy has to leave, you see in the character that you play, one of his aunts, you don't want him to leave the community, though, because you're lonely without him.
It's just a part of you dies when somebody leaves. And Martin is extraordinary in the way he's written this, because it's very sparse. There's no extra words.
No.
But you get a sense of the great love that these two, you're not quite sure if they're actually eccentric or if they're actually very real aunts. The feelings they have for this boy. I mean, half the time they're insulting him and saying he'll never amount to anything, and the other half of the time they're missing him. I just love this play, and I love Martin's writing because it gives us a sense of every aspect of our heads as people. You know, the good side of us and the bad side of us. And what audiences recognise is, you know, what we're like in a bad day. Those elements of our, and what we're like in good day, and how generous we can be, and how the other way we can be about things. And I think he just brings everybody in, and so he does let us feel for these characters.
He's painting a picture of the people, and then painting a picture of the greater culture. I mean, for instance, bringing in of religion.
It could be any culture.
Yes,
It
right.
doesn't have to be Inishmaan. It could be any culture in Ireland. It could be any culture anywhere. But when we were doing Beauty Queen and when we were on Broadway, we were asked at some point, and I happened to be around at the time, that the company who were about to give it its premiere in Iceland, the actors would love to meet up after the show. And so there we all there, and there the four characters in Icelandic, you know, from Iceland walked in, and they looked exactly like their four Irish counterparts on stage.
But I think you're right, Garry, because these could be Muslim fundamentalists. But I told you that I saw a production in Middle America, a very prominent theater, where they heightened the sociological, they heightened the economic bracket of the characters in the Beauty of Queen of Land, and it was just terrible because they weren't deeply poor or needy or desperate, and the play didn't work at all.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we would have. I mean, I think that's an element as well, in the sense that that's part of Martin's strength as a writer, like it was Sings. He is both part of the culture because his parents, and he spent much time there, but he's not. He's from London, and it's that combination of both being within the culture and being able to stand outside it that means, you know, the one question I asked when I read the play first, who could have possibly written this play? Is this some person who lives in Connemara who's hidden it under his bed for the last 30 years? Because I sort of absolutely knew that it wasn't a young Irish writer that wrote it.
In this production of The Cripple of Inishmaan, which premiered in New York at the Atlantic Theatre, where you also premiered Beauty Queen, how many of the actors did you bring from Ireland?
Basically what we did, I mean, Martin and I talked about it, about how we might set up this. Martin very much wanted that if we were to do it again, that he wanted it to be a predominantly Irish company. Yet at the same time we wanted it to be able to play in Ireland and to play also in New York.
And you have certain union considerations.
And we
so
have
yes.
major union considerations, and, you know, it's very, very difficult. So in this case, while we proposed equity, American equity and Irish equity, and both agreed, which was wonderful, which was that of the 10 equity members, including the stage manager, 5 are American equity and 5 are Irish equity. And the American equity actors have rehearsed and performed and toured the play in Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the Irish actors do the same over here. So it's a real sort of co-production, and, you know, we're thrilled that American Equity, you know, have agreed to this. I think that what it's done is it's obviously delivered up work for both American equity actors and Irish equity actors, and it's also delivered up a really good American Irish co-production between Atlantic and Druid.
The richness and the texture of the performances in a lot of the plays that I've seen you guys do, does it come from the fact that you have worked together for so long, that you really, you know, are a family, that you can envision her in this part, or you can go to Garry and say, I'd love to try that? Do you think that the fact that you have been collaborators for so long gives you that extra depth in the productions that you do?
Well, I suppose it does, but also we're from the west of Ireland. We're both from the west of Ireland, and I think when we started off, when we eventually did sing in '75 and didn't feel that we'd done a good job of it and wanted to go back to it. And I think that was a kind of an expression at that time, we were in our 20s, of something that belonged to the fact that we were both from the west of Ireland and the rest of the company as well at the time. So it was like answering something that didn't have a voice in Ireland at the time. I'm not saying that everything was from
What
Dublin.
does that mean to be from the west of Ireland?
It's just you have a different experience growing up there as opposed to living in Dublin.
How so?
Is it poorer? Is it more remote?
It's not particularly poorer. It's more rural, I think. Wouldn't you say that? And I think we noticed that there was a lot of stuff in maybe Sing and one or two, maybe John B, that we instinctively knew about from growing up. Not necessarily that we might have been those people. We had those people around us.
This is a Catholic community, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
But is there a kind of class system in Ireland that there is in Britain, where you're made to feel
no,
less
it's
from
not
certain
so much.
places?
It's not so much a class system. It's just a rural upbringing as opposed to a town upbringing.
The west of Ireland would always have been regarded as the real Ireland. The real Gaelic heart of Ireland beats in the west of Ireland, whereas Dublin and the East Coast, which would have been more under the influence, would have been a more colonised sort of mentality. And, you know, indeed that with the founding of the Abbey, that sense, you know, for instance, that when Sing was originally done in the Abbey, that Sing went out to the Iron Islands and brought back clothes from the Iron Islands, so the whole thing would be authentic. But I think that we would probably have felt in Ireland in the mid-70s that, you know, Galway is a very modern place to be.
Oh, indeed.
And
I
that
don't
kind of sense of the sense of being young and being from the west of Ireland, that's really not being given a voice to, and I think that's what
I
Marie
mean.
is probably,
We felt it wasn't being given a voice.
Yeah,
and
then of course Martin comes along and gives it
well, absolutely.
even greater voice.
How could we ever, you know? We had writers like Friel and particularly like Tom Murphy from the west of Ireland,
yes,
and then somebody
fantastic.
like, you know, Martin comes along.
One of the things I find fascinating about Martin's plays, and indeed about Sing's plays as well, is whenever a character comes on, they don't sort of come in and say exactly what they're going to do at first. They give you a story.
Yeah.
Everybody arrives on stage with a story about someone else in the village or an anecdote. Is this the way life is led in these rural communities?
Not
no, I don't
reality.
think anybody has ever accused Martin of documentary realism.
No.
That would be to severely underestimate his own great imagination. But certainly, I mean, I remember friends of mine, sort of English or American friends of mine, would always say about Irish people, they're very indirect. Why can't you say it straight out that there's an elusive or an elliptical way of sort of going round and talking about things? I think that's probably
And
true.
why is that? And why is that, do you think?
I think it may be something. I mean, people say it's something to do with, first of all, that English is an adopted language of ours, and second of all, it's about you know, being colonised people. I mean, which we were up to 200 years ago, and where there was a gap between the law of the country and the structure of the country and the actual people. I mean, you asked about a class system. There is a class system, the Irish and the English, and that's still sort of there.
And in the real, you know, tense times, you couldn't always say what you really meant.
Absolutely.
For fear of your life.
No, I mean, something like the law, for instance, that's why something like a play like Playboy, you know, where people will shelter a murderer from the law, it's because the law was regarded as not Irish, it was English.
Now, when you guys finish up this run here, do you go back to Ireland? You work regularly at Druid?
Yes,
and other...
I'm very lucky. I am in the last, since we were here before, I got to do the Sing with Druid. I like to go back and do something if Garry has something that might suit.
Be with your peeps, as they say.
Yes, be with your peeps.
Yes.
We're almost out of time. I want to say that this play's so successful that it's extended several times, and with any luck, you'll be playing it for a while.
We hope so. We certainly enjoy playing it.
Yeah, well, it's a terrific play, wonderfully directed by Garry Hynes. It's great to have you back on Theatre Talk. And Marie Mullen, who's so wonderful as a caring, lovely aunt, but I don't know, there's something slightly sinister about those two women, I find, and they just want to keep that boy there.
Yeah,
Keep him
do.
down.
Yeah,
I think they do. The Cripple of Inishmaan at the Atlantic Theatre Company. Don't miss it. Thanks for being our guest tonight on Theatre Talk.
Thank you very much
Very
indeed.
much.
Great. Thanks a lot.
So, Michael, I read in your column recently that there is, of all things, a Michael Jackson musical coming to Broadway?
Yes, and depending on how you feel about Michael Jackson, that's either a cause for celebration or cause for total fear.
Well, no, Michael Jackson, as the songwriter-artist, was quite brilliant.
Well, what's happened is that the Nederlanders, a big producing outfit here in New York, have acquired the rights to Thriller, which sold something like 750 million
One of the biggest sellers of all
videos
time, yeah.
and records and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is a 14-minute video. We all remember from the 80s, Thriller, you know, the zombie or the guy's a zombie or werewolf
Oh, I can tell that's one of your favorite
Yeah,
videos.
I'm on top of it.
He's in the subway and there's packs of youth zombies. Is this right? Is this right, crew? Tell me. There's no. No, tell me.
Yeah, he's not in the subway.
They're in a
Where?
graveyard.
No.
They're in a
Oh,
graveyard.
in their graveyard. Okay. So
Yeah.
he's in the graveyard of these zombies. So that
And
was not-
then in the end he turns out to be a zombie himself. That's the kind of flip.
There's the ironic kicker.
What's interesting about this is, first of all, that's only a 14-minute music video.
Yes, yes.
The Nederlanders simply have the rights to it. They have to now hire a book writer, a director, a choreographer. They have to flesh it all out. Michael Jackson has agreed to write some more songs for it, if need be. He will be involved in the creative process,
See,
as
that's
they
the
call
one
it.
thing I wondered about. Was Michael Jackson involved in the creative process?
Well, I think it's okay as long as the show is not Billy Elliot, let's say, where you have a lot of three boys dancing around. If it's an adult show,
what a
I think
cheap-shot show.
I think it'll be okay.
Right.
In any case, the larger issue, though, here is something that is interesting that the Nederlanders are doing. Jimmy Nederlander Jr., who is the son of Mr. Nederlander Sr., who founded the whole company, before he got involved in the theater, he was very active in the rock world. He tended to that end of the family business, the rock promotion, concerts. So he has good relationships with a lot of iconic rock and pop figures around the country. Well, for example, Jimmy Nederlander Jr. developed a show that I like very much called Movin' Out.
Yes,
and he developed that because of his relationship with Billy Joel.
And then he developed that.
Well, that was a successful one. He also had a relationship with Bob Dylan, and they tried to develop the show The Times They Are Changing, which was a big bomb. The point, though, is that I think that Jimmy Nederlander Jr. has recognized that the music in the musical theater has got to now move on beyond South Pacific, Rodgers and Hammerstein. As much as we love those shows, there are grandmother shows. And the baby boomers of today, who, if they ever get their money back, will have money to spend on Broadway, want to hear the music of their time. And that is Billy Joel and Bob Dylan and Michael Jackson.
Jukebox musicals.
So he's betting on jukebox musicals. Although, in a way, Thriller is not a jukebox musical because it's going to follow the Thriller story. It's just expanding it out. It's an interesting attempt to try something new and different. And I guess, you know, most people do like that music video. I remember, I think as a kid, it was kind of scary and sort of fun.
As a kid. All right.
And I was hip to those music.
Yeah, when you were back in Nepal.
Here, trivia question for you. Who was the voice of the narrator on the Thriller video?
Oh, I don't know.
Vincent Price.
That does go back to your childhood. But now, anyway, Michael, another thing you wrote about was that they're making a musical out of the Addams Family. That one is really in production.
Yeah, that is opening in Chicago in the fall and will be on Broadway a year from now.
Nathan Lane,
B.B. Newworth, Jan Maxwell, Kevin Chamberlain, Terrence Mann, and Mary Louise Burke. I mean, a really first-rate Broadway cast. Written by our friends Rick Ellis and Marshall Brickman, who wrote Jersey Boys. Two very, very funny guys.
Yeah, they did. The only thing I wonder about that is the Addams Family, as you know, I mean, that was from the 40s, the comic strip, then through the 60s, it was the TV show, sort of the horror
and then a movie
family.
in the 90s.
Yes, and it just seems very dated. I mean, I would think now you would want to have more like My Bloody Valentine, the musical, something more hip about horror.
Right. Well, I don't think we're quite there yet, and I don't think it's not going to be a horror musical. It's a musical comedy.
Yes.
That's what it is.
And that's why we have Nathan Lane, our greatest comic actor, don't you think?
Indeed, indeed. What's interesting about this is that the Charles Addams estate is really running this show. I mean, they control the rights, of course, to all these characters, the drawings, and they are a very strong estate, and they're overseeing every aspect of this production. And they insisted from the beginning that this musical not be based on the TV show and not based on the popular movie franchise of the 90s, but it be a completely original story based solely on the sketches and the drawings and the scenes in Charles Addams. It will not use storylines from the movies or from the TV show. It's original to the stage, and it's been updated. So the Addams family now live in New York in 2009, and they live in a spooky castle in Central Park. So we shall see.
Okay, we'll see.
My only hesitation there is the score is by Andrew Lippa, who is an accomplished musician, but he's one of these new breed of composers who are very skillful, but can't write any tunes. And as somebody pointed out to me, who went to this recent reading and liked it, they thought it was very funny and they loved the cast, and they said, but you know, you really think you gotta have a tune that's at least as catchy as da-da-da-dum.
Yeah.
Because without that, if you go see the Addams Family musical, and that tune will not be used. But if you go to see it and you leave it and you're humming da 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 da